Hello and welcome to the Cultured Bumpkin. This is chapter 4 of Emma, Southern Emma by Jane Austen, which will be recording in a Southern accent. And if this is your first time, I record these and then I edit it, and then I'll put the edited recordings in audiobook form onto the Cultured Bumpkin YouTube. So please do subscribe if you're not, if you like classic literature. And let's get started. Chapter 4. Harriet Smith's intimacy at Hartfield was soon a settled thing. Quick and decided in her ways, Emma lost no time in inviting, encouraging, and telling her to come very often. And as their acquaintance increased, so did their satisfaction in each other. As a walking companion, Emma had very early foreseen how useful she might find her. In that respect, Mrs. Weston's loss had been important. Her father never went beyond the shrubbery, where 2 divisions of the ground sufficed him for his long walk, where 2 divisions of the ground sufficed him for his long walk, or his short, as the year varied. And since Mrs. Weston's marriage, her exercise had been too much confined. She had ventured once alone to Randall's, but it was not pleasant, and a Harriet Smith, therefore, one whom she could summon at any time to a walk, would be a valuable addition to her privileges. But in every respect, as she saw more of her, she approved her, and was confirmed in all her kind designs. Harriet certainly was not clever, but she had a sweet, docile, grateful disposition, was totally free from conceit, and only desiring to be guided by any one she looked up to. Her early attachment to herself was very amiable, and her inclination for good company and power of appreciating what was elegant and clever showed that there was no want of taste, though strength of understanding must not be expected. Although she was quite convinced of Harriet Smith's being exactly the young friend she wanted, exactly the something which her home required. Such a friend as Mrs. Weston was out of the question. Two such could never be granted. 2 such she did not want. It was quite a different sort of thing, a sentiment distinct and independent. Mrs. Weston was the object of a regard which had its basis in gratitude and esteem. Harriet would be loved as one to whom she could be useful. For Mrs. Weston, there was nothing to be done. For Harriet, everything. Her first attempts at usefulness were in an endeavor to find out who were the parents, but Harriet would not tell. She was ready to tell everything in her power, but on this subject questions were vain. Emma was obliged to fancy what she liked, but she could never believe that in the same situation she could not have discovered the truth. Harriet had no penetration. She had been satisfied to hear and believe just what Mrs. Goddard chose to tell her, and looked no further. Mrs. Goddard and the teachers and the girls and the affairs of the school in general formed naturally a great part of the conversation. But for her acquaintance with the Martins of Abbey Mill Farm, it must have been the whole. But the Martins occupied her thoughts a good deal. She had spent 2 very happy months with them, and now loved to talk of the pleasures of her visit and describe the many comforts and wonders of the place. Emma encouraged her talkativeness. Amused by such a picture of another set of beings, and enjoying the youthful simplicity which could not speak with so much exultation of Mrs. Martin's having 2 parlors, 2 very good parlors indeed, one of them quite as large as Mrs. Goddard's drawing room, and of her having an upper maid who had lived 25 years with her, and of their having 8 cows, 2 of them Alderneys, and 1 little Welch cow, and 1 very pretty little Welch cow indeed, and of Mrs. Martin saying, as she was so fond of it, it should be called her cow, and of their having a handsome summer house in their garden, when someday next year they were all to drink tea, a very handsome summer house, large enough to hold 12 people. For some time she was amused, without thinking beyond the immediate cause. But as soon as she came to understand the family better, other feelings arose. She had taken up a wrong idea, fancying it was a mother and daughter, a son and son's wife, who all lived together. But when it appeared that the Mr. Martin, who bore a part in the narrative and was always mentioned with approbation for his great good nature in doing something or other, was a single man, that there was no young Mrs. Martin, no wife in the case, she did suspect danger to her poor little friend from all this hospitality and kindness, and that if she were not taken care of, she might be required to sink herself forever. With this inspiring notion, her questions increased in number and meaning, and she particularly led Harriet to talk more of Mr. Martin, and there was evidently no dislike to it. Harriet was very ready to speak of the share he had in their moonlight walks and merry evening games, and dwelt a good deal upon his being so very good-humored and obliging. He had gone 3 miles round one day in order to bring her some walnuts, because she had said how fond she was of them, and in everything else he was so very obliging. He had his shepherd's son into the parlor one night on purpose to sing to her. She was very fond of singing. He could sing a little himself. She believed he was very clever and understood everything. He had a very fine flock, and while she was with him, he had been bid more for his wool than anybody in the country. She believed everybody spoke well of him. His mother and sisters were very fond of him. Mrs. Martin had told her one day, and there was a blush as she said it, that it was impossible for anybody to be a better son, and therefore she was sure whenever he married, he would make a good husband. Not that she wanted him to marry. She was in no hurry at all. "Well done, Mrs. Martin," thought Emma. "You know what you're about." And when she had come away, Mrs. Martin was so very kind as to send Mrs. Goddard a beautiful goose, the finest goose Mrs. Goddard had ever seen. Mrs. Goddard had it dressed on a Sunday and asked all the 3 teachers, Miss Nash and Miss Prince and Miss Richardson, to sup with her. Mr. Martin, I suppose, is not a man of information beyond the line of his own business. He does not read. Oh, yes, that is, no, I don't know. But I believe he has read a good deal, but not what you would think anything of. He's read the agricultural reports and some other books that lay in one of the window seats, but he reads all of them to himself. And sometimes of an evening, before we went to cards, he would read something aloud of the elegant extracts, very entertaining. And I know he's read The Vicar of Wakefield. He never read The Romance of the Forest nor The Children of the Abbey. He's never heard of such books before I mentioned them, but he's determined to get them now as soon as ever he can. The next question was, what sort of looking man is Mr. Martin? Oh, not handsome at all. I thought him very plain at first, but I do not think him so plain now. One does not, after a time. One does not, after a time. But did you never see him? He's in Highbury every now and then, and he's sure to ride through every week on his way to Kingston. He's passed you very often. Excuse me. That may be, and I may have seen him 50 times, but without having any idea of his name. A young farmer, whether on horseback or on foot, is the very last sort of person to raise my curiosity. The yeomanry are precisely the order of people with whom I feel I can have nothing to do. A degree or two lower and a credible appearance might interest me. I might hope to be useful to their families in some way or other, but a farmer can need none of my help, and is therefore, in one sense, as much above my notice as in every other he is below it. To be sure. Oh, yes, it's not likely you should ever have observed him, but he knows you very well indeed. I mean by sight. Oh, I have no doubt of his being a very respectable young man. I know indeed that he is so, and I know indeed that he is so, and as such wish him well. What do you imagine his age to be? He was 4 and 20 the 8th of last June, and my birthday is the 23rd, just a fortnight and a day's difference, which is very odd. Only 4 and 20. That is too young to settle. His mother's perfectly right not to be in a hurry. They seem very comfortable as they are, and if she were to take any pains to marry him, she would probably repent it. 6 years hence, if he could meet with a good sort of woman in the same rank as his own, with a little money, it might be very desirable. 6 years hence! Dear Miss Woodhouse, he'd be 30 years old. Well, and that is as early as most men can afford to marry, who are not born to an independence. Mr. Martin, I imagine, has his fortune entirely to make, cannot be at all beforehand with the world. Whatever money he might come into when his father died, whatever his share of the family property, it's, I dare say, all afloat, all employed in his stock and so forth. And though with diligence and good luck he may be rich in time, it's next to impossible that he should have realized anything yet. Oh, to be sure, it's so. But they live very comfortably. They have no indoors man, else they do not want for anything, and Mrs. Martin talks of taking the boy another year. I wish you may not get into a scrape, Harriet, whenever he does marry. I mean, as to being acquainted with his wife, for though his sisters from a superior education are not to be altogether objected to, it does not follow that he might marry anybody at all for you to notice. The misfortune of your birth ought to make you particularly careful as to your associates. There can be no doubt of your being a gentleman's daughter, and you must support your claim to that station by everything within your own power, or there'll be plenty of people who would take pleasure in degrading you. Yes, to be sure, I suppose there are. But while I visited Hartfield, and you're so kind to me, Miss Woodhouse, I'm not afraid of what anybody can do. You understand the force of influence pretty well, Harriet, but I would have you so firmly established in good society as to be independent even of Hartfield and Mrs. as to be independent even of Hartfield and Miss Woodhouse. I want you to see, I want you permanently well connected, and to that end it will be advisable to have as few odd acquaintance as may be, and therefore I say that you should still be in this country And therefore I say, if you should still be in this country when Mr. Martin marries, I wish you may not be drawn in by your intimacy with his sisters to be acquainted with a wife who will probably be some mere farmer's daughter without education. To be sure, yes. Not that I think Mr. Martin would ever marry anybody but what had some education and had been very well brought up. However, I do not mean to set up my opinion against yours. I'm sure I shall not wish for the acquaintance of his wife. I shall always have a great regard for the Miss Martins, especially Elizabeth, and should be very sorry to give them up, for they're quite as well educated as me. But if he marries a very ignorant, vulgar woman, certainly I had better not visit her if I can help it. Emma watched her through the fluctuations of the speech and saw no alarming symptoms of love. The young man had been the first admirer, but she trusted there was no other hold, and that there would be no serious difficulty on Harriet's side to oppose any friendly arrangement of her own. They met Mr. Martin the very next day, as they were walking on the Donwell road. He was on foot, and after looking very respectfully at her, looked with most unfeigned satisfaction at her companion. Emma was not sorry to have such an opportunity of survey, and walking a few yards forward while they talked together soon made her quick eye sufficiently acquainted with Mr. Robert Martin. His appearance was very neat, and he looked like a sensible young man, but his appearance had no other advantage, and when he came to be contrasted with gentlemen, she thought he must lose all the ground he had gained in Harriet's inclination. Harriet was not insensible of manner. She had voluntarily noticed her father's gentleness with admiration as well as wonder. Mr. Martin looked as if he did not know what manner was. They remained but a few minutes together, as Miss Woodhouse must not be kept waiting, And Harriet then came running to her with a smiling face and in a flutter of spirits, which Miss Woodhouse hoped very soon to compose. "Oh, think of our happening to meet him. How very odd. It was quite a chance," he said, "that he had not gone round by Randall's. He didn't think we ever walked this road. He thought we walked toward Randall's most days. He's not been able to get the romance of the forest yet. He was so busy the last time he was at Kingston that he quite forgot it, but he goes again tomorrow. So very odd we should happen to meet. Well, Miss Woodhouse, is he like what you expected? What do you think of him? Do you think him so very plain?" He is very plain, undoubtedly, remarkably plain. There is nothing compared with his entire want of gentility. I had no right to expect much, and I did not expect much, but I had no idea that he could be so very clownish, so totally without air. I had imagined him, I confess, a degree or two nearer gentility. "To be sure," said Harriet in a mortified voice, "he's not so genteel as a real gentleman." "I think, Harriet, since your acquaintance with us, you have been repeatedly in the company of some very real gentlemen, that you must yourself be struck with the difference in Mr. Martin. At Hartfield, you had at Hartfield, you have had very good specimens of well-educated, well-bred men. I should be surprised if, after seeing him, you could be in company with Mr. Martin again without perceiving him to be a very inferior creature, and rather wondering at yourself for having ever thought him at all agreeable before. Do you not feel, and rather wondering at yourself for having ever thought him at all agreeable before? Do you not begin to feel that now? Were you not struck? I'm sure you must have been struck by his awkward look and abrupt manner and the uncouthness of a voice which I heard to be wholly unmodulated as I stood here." "Certainly. He's not like Mr. Knightley. He's not he's not like Mr. Knightley. He has not such a fine air and way of walking as Mr. Knightley. I see the difference plain enough. But Mr. Knightley is so very fine a man." Mr. Knightley's oops. Let me turn on my, I think sometimes it gets kind of hot in here. Let me, there we go. Let's see. Mr. Knightley's air is so remarkably good that it's not fair to compare Mr. Martin with him. You might not see one in 100 with gentlemen so plainly written as Mr. Knightley. But he's not the only gentleman you've been used to lately. What say you to Mr. Weston and Mr. Elton? Compare Mr. Martin with either of them. Compare their manner of carrying themselves, of walking, of speaking, of being silent. You must see the difference." "Oh, yes, there is a great difference. But Mr. Weston is almost an old man. Mr. Weston must be between 40 and 50. "Which makes his good manners the more valuable. The older a person grows, Harriet, the more important it is that their manners should not be bad. The more glaring and disgusting any loudness or coarseness or awkwardness becomes. What's passable in youth is detestable in later age. Mr. Martin is now awkward and abrupt. What will he be at Mr. Weston's time of life?" "There's no saying, indeed," replied Harriet rather solemnly. "But there may be pretty good guessing. He will be a completely gross, vulgar farmer, totally inattentive to appearance and thinking of nothing but profit and loss." "Will he indeed? That'll be very bad." How much his business engrosses him already is very plain from the circumstance of how much his business engrosses him already is very plain from the circumstance of his forgetting to inquire for the book he recommended. He was a great deal too full of the market to think of anything else, which is just as it should be for a thriving man. What has he to do with books? And I have no doubt that he will thrive and be a very rich man in time, and his being illiterate and coarse need not disturb us." "I wonder he did not remember the book," was all Harriet's answer, and spoken with a great excuse me, and spoken with a degree of grave displeasure which Emma thought might be safely left to itself. She therefore said no more for some time. Her next beginning was, "In one respect, perhaps, Mr. Elton's manners are superior to Mr. Knightley's or Mr. Weston's. They have more gentleness. They might be more safely held up as a pattern. There is an openness, a quickness, almost a bluntness in Mr. Weston, which everybody likes to see because there's so much good humor with it. But that would not do to be copied. Neither would Mr. Knightley's downright, decided, commanding sort of manner, though it suits him very well. His figure and look and situation in life seem to allow it." Sorry, I think this is She therefore said no more for some time. Her next beginning was, "In one respect, perhaps, Mr. Elton's manners are superior to Mr. Knightley's or Mr. Weston's. They have more gentleness. They might be more safely held up as a pattern. There's an openness, a quickness, almost a bluntness in Mr. Weston, which everybody likes in him because there's so much good humor with it. But that would not do to be copied. Neither would Mr. Knightley's downright, decided, commanding sort of manner, though it suits him very well. His figure and look and situation in life seem to allow it. But if any young man were to set about copying him, he would not be sufferable. On the contrary, I think a young man might be very safely recommended to take Mr. Elton as a model. Mr. Elton is cheerful. Mr. Elton is good-humored, cheerful, obliging, and gentle. He seems to me to be grown particularly gentle of late. I do not know whether he has any design of ingratiating himself with either of us, Harriet, by additional softness. But it strikes me that his manners are softer than they used to be. If he means anything, it must be to please you. Did it not? Did I not tell you what he had said? Did I not tell you what he said of you the other day?" She then repeated some warm personal praise which she had drawn from Mr. Elton, and now did full justice to. And Harriet blushed and smiled, and said she had always thought Mr. Elton very agreeable. She then repeated some warm personal praise which she had drawn from Mr. Elton, and now did. Mr. Elton was the very person fixed on by Emma for driving the young farmer out of Harriet's head. She thought it would be an excellent match, and only too palpably desirable, natural, and probable for her to have much merit in planning it. She feared it was what everybody else must think of and predict. It was not likely, however, that anybody should have equaled her in the date of the plan, as it had entered her brain during the very first evening of Harriet's coming to Hartfield. The longer she considered it, the greater was her sense of its expediency. Mr. Elton's situation was most suitable, quite the gentleman himself, and without low connections. At the same time, not of any family that could fairly object to the doubtful birth of Harriet. He had a comfortable home for her, and Emma imagined a very sufficient income, for though the vicarage of Highbury was not large, he was known to have some independent property, and she thought very highly of him as a good-humored, well-meaning, respectable young man without any deficiency of useful understanding or knowledge of the world. She had already satisfied herself that he thought Harriet a beautiful girl, which she trusted, with such frequent meetings at Hartfield, was foundation enough on his side. And on Harriet's, there could be little doubt that the idea of being preferred by him would have all the usual weight and efficacy. And he was really a very pleasing young man, a young man whom any woman not fastidious might like. He was reckoned very handsome, his person much admired in general, though not by her, there being a want of elegance of feature which she could not dispense with. But the girl who could be gratified by a Robert Martin riding about the country to get walnuts for her might very well be conquered by Mr. Elton's admiration. That was the end of chapter 4. Yeah, old Emma's kind of a stuck-up old gal. This is such good storytelling. I love Jane Austen so much. She's so good. Okay, I think I'm gonna probably do. I'll do one more chapter anyway. Chapter 5. Yeah, we'll do chapter 5. Chapter 5. I don't know what your opinion may be, Mrs. Weston, said Mr. Knightley, of this great intimacy between Emma and Harriet Smith, but I think it's a bad thing. A bad thing? Do you really think it's a bad thing? Why so? I think they will neither of them do the other any good. You surprise me. Emma must do Harriet good, and by supplying her with a new object of interest, Harriet may be said to do Emma good. I've been seeing their intimacy with the greatest pleasure. How very differently we feel. Not think that they will do each other not think they'll do each other any good. This will certainly be the beginning of one of our quarrels about Emma, Mr. Knightley. Perhaps you think I'm come on purpose to quarrel with you, knowing Weston will be out, but that you might fight your own battle. Excuse me, sorry, I don't know what the deal is. Clearing the old throat. Knowing Weston to be out, and that you must still fight your own battle. Mr. Weston would undoubtedly support me if he were here, for he thinks exactly as I do on the subject. We were speaking of it only yesterday, and agreeing how fortunate it was for Emma that there should be a girl in Highbury for her to associate with. Mr. Knightley, I shall not allow you to be a fair judge in this case. You are so much used to live alone that you don't know the value of a companion, and perhaps no man can be a good judge of the comfort a woman feels in the society of one of her own sex after being used to it all her life. I can imagine your objection to Harriet Smith. She's not the superior young woman which Emma's friend ought to be, but on the other hand, as Emma wants to see her better informed, it'll be an inducement for her to read more herself. They'll be read together. She means it, I know. Emma has been meaning to read more ever since she was 12 years old. I've seen a great many lists of her drawn up at various times of books that she meant to read regularly through, and very good lists they were, very well chosen, very neatly arranged, sometimes alphabetically and sometimes by some other rule. The list she drew up when only 14, I remember thinking it did her judgment so much credit that I preserved it some time. And I dare say she may have made out a very good list now. But I have done with expecting any course of steady reading from Emma. She'll never submit to anything requiring industry and patience, and a subjection of the fancy to the understanding. Where Miss Taylor failed to stimulate, I may safely affirm that Harriet Smith will do nothing. You could never persuade her to read half so much as you wished. You know you couldn't. I dare say, replied Mrs. Weston, smiling, that I thought so then, but since we've parted, I can never remember Emma's omitting to do anything I wished. There's hardly any desire in to refresh such a memory as that, said Mr. Knightley, feelingly, and for a moment or two he had done. But I, he soon added, who have had no such charm thrown over my senses, must still see, hear, and remember. Emma is spoiled by being the cleverest of her family. At 10 years old, she had the misfortune of being able to answer questions which puzzled her sister at 17. She was always quick and assured. Isabella slow and diffident. And ever since she was 12, Emma's been the mistress of the house and of you all. In her mother, she lost the only person able to cope with her. She inherits her mother's talents and must have been under subjection to her. I should have been sorry, Mr. Knightley, to be dependent on your recommendation had I quitted Mr. Woodhouse's family and wanted another situation. I don't think you would have spoken a good word to me for anybody. I'm sure you always thought me unfit for the office I held. Yes, he said, smiling. You're better placed here, very fit for a wife, but not at all for a governess. But you were preparing yourself to be an excellent wife all the time you were at Hartfield. You might not You might not give Emma such a complete education as your powers would seem to promise, but you were receiving a very good education from her on the very material matrimonial point of submitting your own will and doing as you were bid. And as if Weston had asked me to recommend him a wife, I should certainly have named Miss Taylor. Thank you. There will be very little merit in making such a good wife to a man as Mr. Weston. To such a man as Mr. Weston. Why, to own the truth, I'm afraid you're rather thrown away, and that with every disposition to bear, there'll be nothing to be borne. We'll not despair, however. Weston may grow cross from the wantonness of comfort, or his son may plague him. I hope not that. It's not likely. No, Mr. Knightley. Don't foretell vexation from that quarter. No, I not I, indeed. I only name possibilities. I don't pretend to Emma's genius for foretelling and guessing. I hope with all my heart the young man may be a Weston in merit and a Churchill in fortune. But Harriet Smith, I've not half done about Harriet Smith. I think her the very worst sort of companion that Emma could possibly have. She knows nothing herself and looks upon Emma as knowing everything. She's a flatterer in all her ways, and so much the worse because undesigned. Her ignorance is hourly flattery. How can Emma imagine she has anything to learn herself, while Harriet's presenting such a delightful inferiority? And as for Harriet, I'll venture to say that she cannot gain by the acquaintance. Hartfield will only put her out of deceit with all the other places she belongs to. She'll grow just refined enough to be uncomfortable with those among whom birth and circumstance have placed her home. I am much mistaken if Emma's doctrines give any strength of mind or tend at all to make a girl adapt herself rationally to the varieties of her situation in life. They only give a little polish. I either depend more upon Emma's good sense than you do, or I'm more anxious for her present comfort, for I cannot lament the acquaintance. How well she looked last night! Oh, you'd rather talk of her person than her mind, would you? Very well. I shall not attempt to deny Emma's being pretty. Pretty? Say beautiful, rather. Can you imagine anything nearer perfect beauty than Emma altogether, face and figure? I don't know what I could imagine, but I confess that I've seldom seen a face or figure more pleasing to me than hers. But I'm a partial old friend. Such an eye, the true hazel eye, and so brilliant. Regular features, open countenance, with a complexion. Oh, what a bloom of full health, and such a pretty height and size, such a firm and upright figure. There's health, not merely in her bloom. There's health, not merely in her bloom, but in her air, her head, her glance. One hears something of a child being the picture of health. Now, Emma always gives me the idea of being the complete picture of grown-up health. She is loveliness herself. Mr. Knightley, is she not? I have not a fault to find with her person, he replied. I think her all you describe. I love to look at her, and I will add this praise, that I do not think her personally vain, considering how very handsome she is. She appears to be very little occupied with it. Her vanity lies another way. Mrs. Weston, I'm not to be talked out of my dislike of Harriet Smith, or my dread of its doing both them harm. And I, Mr. Knightley, am equally stout in my confidence of its not doing them any harm. With all dear Emma's little faults, she is an excellent creature. Where shall we see a better daughter, or a kinder sister, or a truer friend? No, she has qualities which may be trusted. She'll never lead anyone really wrong. She'll make no lasting blunder. Where Emma errs once, she's in the right 100 times. Very well, I'll not plague you any more. Emma shall be an angel, and I will keep my spleen to myself till Christmas brings John and Isabella. John loves Emma with a reasonable and therefore not a blind affection, and Isabella always does as he does, except when he is not quite frightened enough about the children. I am sure of having their opinions with me. Quick little break. Hope everybody's doing good tonight, whether you are live or catching the replay sometime in the future. I know that you all love her really too well to be. I know that you all love her really too well to be unjust or unkind. But excuse me, Mr. Knightley, if I take the liberty, I consider myself, as having somewhat of the privilege of speech that Emma's mother might have had, the liberty of hinting that I don't think any possible good can arise from Harriet's the liberty of hinting that I do not think any possible good can arise from Harriet Smith's intimacy being made a matter of such discussion among you. The liberty of hinting that I do not think any possible good can arise from Harriet Smith's intimacy being made a matter of such discussion among you. Pray excuse me, but supposing any little inconvenience may be apprehended from the intimacy, it cannot be expected that Emma, accountable to nobody but her father, who perfectly approves the acquaintance, should put an end to it, so long as it's a source of pleasure to herself. It's been so many years my province to give advice that you cannot be surprised, Mr. Knightley, at this little remains of office. Not at all, cried he. I'm much obliged to you for it. It's very good advice, and it shall have a better fate than your advice has often found, for it shall be attended to. Mrs. John Knightley is easily alarmed and might be made unhappy about her sister. Be satisfied, said he. I will not raise any outcry. I'll keep my ill humor to myself. I have a very sincere interest in Emma. Isabella does not seem more my sister, has never excited a greater interest. Isabella does not seem more my sister, has never excited a greater interest, perhaps hardly so great. There's an anxiety, a curiosity in what one feels for Emma. I wonder what'll become of her. So do I, said Mrs. Weston gently, very much. She always declares she'll never marry, which of course means just nothing at all. But I have no idea that she's ever seen a man she cared for. It would not be a bad thing for her to be very much in love with a proper object. I should like to see Emma in love, and some sort of return would do her good. But there's nobody hereabouts to attach her, and she goes so seldom from home. There does indeed seem as little to tempt her to break her resolution at present, said Mrs. Weston, as can well be, and while she is so happy at Hartfield, I cannot wish her to be forming any attachment which would be creating such difficulties on poor Mr. Woodhouse's account. I do not recommend matrimony at present to Emma, though I mean no slight to the state, I assure you. Part of her meaning was to conceal some favorite thoughts of her own and Mr. Weston's on the subject as much as possible. There were wishes at Randall's respecting Emma's destiny, but it was not desirable to have them suspected. And the quiet transition, which Mr. Knightley soon afterwards made to, "What does Weston think of the weather? Shall we have rain?" convinced her that he had nothing more to say or surmise about Hartfield. That is the end of chapter 5. So that is where we will stop this good night, and thank you for watching, and I will catch you hopefully, I don't know, some other time, tomorrow night perhaps.